Hmm.
The the other article that is a fun one that I want to chat about today is from MIT Technology Review, and it is referring to a research, I guess you'd call it an experiment
Hmm.
that some researchers did, and they created 1,000 software agents. So these were autonomous agents that they're using LLMs to play the game Minecraft. And this was all done by an AI startup called Altera,
Hmm.
and apparently it's part of a broad field I didn't know existed, but it's all in using this idea of simulated agents to model how human groups interact. And so there's a lot of very real world important uses for this. This isn't just someone goofing off and deciding what they can do with the game. That this is the idea is that this can be used from everything from market research to test ideas where you have these simulated agents doing things, as well as looking at, projecting how society may react to significant changes in a culture, right? So it has a very significant real world impact, but they're testing it using Minecraft.
Hmm.
And it's absolutely fascinating. And we're going to post a link to this article. I highly encourage you to read it. But basically, what we saw is when they got up to significant numbers of these agents, and like I said, they got up to about 1,000 that could be supported on this server. That you actually saw emergent characteristics that they started taking on jobs. They did some tests where they planted almost like conspiracy theories, and what I think one of they created a religion, and it literally spread. I mean, absolutely fascinating, a little scary, and absolutely fascinating to see where this is all going. And to me, I look at it from the lens of juxtaposed to all this talk we have right now about autonomous agents and them taking action. This is obviously all living in a very enclosed world here, this virtual Minecraft world, but absolutely fascinating about what this could mean for, as we start extrapolating out where this is going.
Yeah, and to me, this went back down to two fundamental ideas that I think happen in general. First is evolutionary behavior, that anytime you get a mass of anything, call it cells, proteins, and you bring them together, they are going to work together in a way that ensures the survival of the whole, or they're going to die out. And when what we see is the survival mechanism. So it's not a surprise that a bunch of AIs are going to do something similar, in that if they are trying to create an ecosystem that is self-preserving and self-running, that they are going to figure out things like roles and assumptions and shared concepts, which then turn into beliefs, which then may turn into conspiracy theories over time as they evolve. And this conspiracy theory is based on an assumption that was made. And that assumption was made based on an activity that had to be done for the ecosystem to survive as a whole. These things build on top of each other. You can't just stop at the first level and not expect things to expand from that perspective. And that has broad societal implications, of course, but we should also expect this to happen in our regular lives. So this is going to be a second or third order issue that happens in general as we bring in more AIs, more agents, more autonomous behavior into our organizations. There's this unexpected second or third order activity that is going to happen. So I think this Minecraft experiment is extremely useful in warning us of what is going to be in our own environments in 5 to 10 years, as all these agents and AIs keep improving and expanding. But there's a second
So
piece.
they
Yeah,
didn't.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
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 no, go
no,
ahead.
no.
Yeah, I
I'll
didn't
get
realize.
to the second part later.
Well, I'm curious if this is related because the part that it didn't talk about is, as far as I know, that this was in a closed world, that it was just agents playing with themselves. But I would have loved to have seen, or if there's a future experiment here where these agents are then interacting with humans, because I do think it's something we're not talking about in an enterprise context at all. But I do think will eventually be a concern as these autonomous agents start taking on greater authority and greater autonomy. And we're increasingly seeing the injection of personality into them. I do think there's going to be this open question about what is that second what did you just call it? Second order
Second
of
order,
impact.
third order. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, on the culture of the enterprise, right? Within your
Mhm.
organization, do people start reacting and interacting with them differently? So I don't know if that's where you were going or not, but I did find that to be like a really interesting question mark.
Yeah, and I think it probably helps. So I don't know exactly how these software agents were programmed to be in Minecraft, but I am guessing that they were programmed to be cooperative in some way and to have specific skills in the first place. And I think that it that is going to be an important piece of the puzzle. Right now, when we look at generative AI, most agents, they are trained to be positive and to be confident. But is that actually the right mindset to create a hybrid ecosystem and work environment? Or should these agents be naturally more curious and more doubting and willing to second guess themselves? We don't actually know the answer yet, but I can guess that if agents end up being confident to the extreme, that could actually result in some problems. And I think it's good to be able to test that in something like Minecraft, because my second point was that I think one of the important things from a business perspective in looking at gaming or looking at like sports is that you have a framework of rules that fundamentally can be tested. So when we use AI for things like chess or to analytics for moneyball things like baseball and basketball and football and soccer, we are able to figure out the metrics and the activities that optimize within a very complex but set rules. And that's always a helpful starting point, because as we try to expand that AI into business or society or the real world, obviously the set of rules is much more nebulous, but we can start with a very structured set of rules that can get very complex simply by through trying to figure out which rules interact with each other.
Well, I mean, I think the potential around this, and to me, I think it ultimately will become this idea of because even right now, when we're talking about autonomous agents, we are talking in this very narrow banded sort of view of it, right? But this idea of a true autonomous agent that sort of sits there and functions on its own has a lot of real interesting possibilities. I mean, one of the challenges I think that enterprises have is ferreting out all those rules you're talking about, and I
Mhm.
think agents like this can actually help you understand what those are because they have to live within those norms and can sort of surface. Um, and then, secondly, I think exactly in the same context where we can use them to create simulations. And we're already seeing some of this, right? But I think we're going to see a revolution in HR where we can start using generative AI, LLM based simulations
Mhm.
to really transform the way we teach people things like compliance and policy rules, right? Where they
Mhm.
can have a simulated experience that no training in a multiple choice question test is ever going to accomplish, right? And I do think it's interesting as we continue to sort of go down this road on both a societal level and from an enterprise perspective, where this may play out is that the CEO of Altera, what his big ambition for all of this is eventually to create AIs that can in fact interact and perhaps care for humans, right? This is like the movie I, Robot kind of stuff. Um,
Right. Mhm.
and it, the article sort of examined this question. It's like, well, is it possible for them to have emotions? And the general consensus is sort of two answers, right? One, no, and second, but doesn't matter. If the simulation is sufficient that you feel like they do, and that's what you're getting out of it, is that going to be enough, and does that matter? And again, I start thinking, yes, we have things like taking care of the elderly, kind of a context, but there's also in going to a contact center agent, right, where I can actually create this empathetic agent that interacts and has that emotional level of engagement. It could be truly transformative. And so, I think it's what I love about this experiment and these sorts of efforts is that it helps us look into the future. And it's like, well, where's this going to go? And ask the question, do we want it to go there? Does this make sense? What are the potential challenges with it? And I think there's a whole lot of it in this innocuous little game of Minecraft.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I would be really interested in seeing with this is that you could set up, scales of literal to figurative, like 0 to 100, or taking action versus like being more reflective, being conservative with your recommendations versus being, liberal, or being, really out there. And playing with these scales, or how cooperative are you with each other, from not cooperative, totally individual, to always helping out each other, and figuring out, like, using these scales to figure out which agent activities end up being most productive in these environments, and that might be the tone that you want to set in your company, at least for either for short-term or long-term gains, and then program using those assumptions as a starting point for developing the prompts or your agents in your company. You might find that something that sounds like being extremely cooperative might sound great in theory, but in reality, it means nothing ever gets done, or people end up using, like, kind of the lowest common denominator rather than the best idea. And so being able to judge, being able to tweak these settings and get the right tone for your company might end up being an extremely valuable competitive advantage over time.
It is interesting. I mean, I foresee a future. We've spent time talking about this idea of the digital twin, and we mostly talk about the digital twin either in the form of a technical architecture or in the context of a process architecture, right? Where we're creating a version of it that we can then model against. But what is intriguing about this is that so play this out, right? You have Copilot, you have a bunch of AI agents that are sitting there and they're interacting with me as an employee at a company. And as part of that, understanding sort of how I think and how I tick, and then sort of being able to then aggregate that. And I'm not sure if this is good or scary, right? But aggregate that across the country, where in effect we can create a cultural digital twin where we
Mm-hmm.
sort of understand the cultural perceptions and biases and whatever that exists within an organization, and then run these simulations. And right, my OCM mind goes, wow, how amazing this would be to test.
Mm-hmm.
What if we take this approach to try to change behavior, or take this approach to make this transformation, and to see how the culture responds to it? I mean, the potential is just staggering, and like I said, a little scary, because we're bordering on this idea of capturing, the essence of the human psyche into these systems. But yeah, it is very intriguing.
Yeah, so I don't think we can simply recreate emotions. Emotions are extremely complex, but we can definitely recreate and generate traits or attributes. Um, and we have metrics show, and variability capabilities to do a lot of specific traits. And if those traits, end up reflecting a certain type of emotion or a certain type of basic personality, yeah, we can say AI has a personality from that perspective. I don't think that is a human level personality, but yeah, we can basically create personality traits and generalizations. I'm fine with saying that is where we are at this point, and being able to translate those generalizations into something that can assist us, or help reflect a better environment for us from a working perspective would be great. And the challenge, I think, is that there's going to be a lot of agent environments, frankly, that don't take all of this into account and may end up creating a more toxic work environment. I would not be surprised to see that happen as well, because there are unexpected consequences of having AIs that are this smart in our environment that we are not completely taking into account.
And I think, we spent a fair amount of time on this one, having a little bit of fun being a little bit more philosophical, but let's try to bring it down pragmatically for our
Sure.
CIO. What is the takeaway from this? And I think that's exactly it. I think that we have to recognize that what this is, when you are implementing AI within your organization, it is not just another technology, and maybe not today, but in the not too distant future, there is the possibility that there are emerging characteristics that will come from that directly or indirectly within your organization. And you need to be thinking about that, both in terms of how you then drive adoption, but also what the ramifications of that adoption are, because it will change your organization's culture and the way you function, for better, for worse. And you should take an active role in deciding which it is.
Yeah, and as trivial or ridiculous as it might sound for Altera to be testing out agent behavior and LLM behavior in Minecraft, I would not be surprised if this becomes an enterprise product within the next few years, where enterprises can bring all of their agents, LLMs, and other generative AI tools into a single test environment to figure out how they work together and if they are helping each other to enhance solutions and answers, or if they are actually fighting against each other and inhibiting progress. I think that is going to be a thing. I'm as we've been talking about this, I'm convinced that it is going to become an issue.
Well, I guess we'll have to check in another year and see if that's what's happening.